honestly don't know how well the relationship is working. My understanding is that recently the University of Washington and the police department and the community did hold some meetings to talk about how to improve coordination. It seems like that's a pretty important thing to do. And I recognize there may be differences of approach to certain types of issues that you have to have a clear understanding between the UW Police Department and the Seattle Police Department. Who's going to respond first, or if they both respond at the same time, what's the approach they want to take. But I imagine that type of process of discussion will start yielding what are the problems in coordination as well. You can have growth in employment and in an employment center like the U District without having an increase in traffic. And that's what happened with the UPass plant. So over 20 years, the UW has grown, hasn't necessarily increased the amount of traffic coming to and from the U, which is a real testament to carpooling, expanding bus service, which is what UPass did at the time. So I think we have a tendency to think that growth means inevitably more cars, and it doesn't have to mean that if you make a shift, and UW's a real leader in that. So on 520, I think the biggest problem with 520 is we're trying to figure out how to add 50% more lanes to it, which probably means 50% more traffic. And Montlake Bridge is small. The streets at Montlake and the streets in the UW are pretty much often at capacity, particularly around that bridge. So now they're talking about billion-dollar solutions to try to get the traffic to either side of the Montlake cut. But either way, they're still going to land onto surface streets that don't have much capacity. They're just very constrained. So, and then at the end of it, you hit I-5, which is also very constrained. The worst choke point on I-5 is 520 and I-5. So I've long been a proponent of, instead of doing 6 lanes of traffic, make it 4 lanes of traffic, 1 lane of light rail each way. In areas like this, oftentimes housing becomes substandard. Property's held for a long time, it's not maintained properly, and it provides, pretty cheap housing or affordable housing for students that want to live near campus. So, but there are standards, and they should be enforced. And one of the things that the city is looking at is, an inspection program that's funded through the property owners themselves. And it's a little bit controversial. The bigger property owners, the property owners who maintain high standards already, are supportive of it. Those people that may, just maybe only own 1 property or 2 and view that this might be an imposition on them to have to fund it, or someone's going to come in on their property and check it out. There are a lot of people who fear it's government regulation that's unnecessary. But I think I think the city will move forward with some type of funded program for housing inspection to bring up the quality of substandard housing. I was head of the graduate and professional student 20 years ago, and there was a couple of things we fought for then, which I was pretty proud of. The university was expanding into Southwest Campus at the time, and it had purchased a lot of buildings which were housing, which were going to be displaced by new campus buildings, and some of them are there now. So we worked then to have the city, to have the university invest in replacing that housing, and they did. They also wanted to convert the Commodore Duchess apartments into office space to go along with the Schmitz Hall office space, and we managed to keep that in housing as well. So I guess I'm mentioning these things because having affordable housing within walking distance or transit distance or biking distance of campus really makes a big difference for a student who's already on a fairly tight budget. So I think there's a lot we can do to make transit better in the city, a lot we can do to make more affordable housing available to students, and not just campus-supported student housing. I would love to get the Sonics back to Seattle Center, or I guess a team named the Sonics back to Seattle Center. But the challenge is to come up with a financing plan that makes sense. So in the sense that the city doesn't get stuck, or the taxpayers of the city don't get stuck with too much of the funding. And I think that's possible, and there are economic benefits for Queen Anne and the area. So Husky Stadium, same question. So I'm a skeptic of using a lot of taxpayer dollars to expand stadiums. I think there's so much need out there and such limited resources. But it doesn't mean that you can't have some public funding if you can make the case that it's going to generate additional tax revenue for the city or additional benefits for the city that make it worth it. We see a very bad economy right now, which I think if you're a student, has a lot of implications. Even if you're not a student, what's the employment situation going to be for folks when they graduate? Are they going to have good opportunities to, build a meaningful career? Also has real implications for funding of higher education from the state level. The other set of issues, there's another set of issues we face, which is we have extraordinary environmental challenges as well in the future. And we already know that. Global warming, pollution in Puget Sound are really serious long-range problems. And finally, with a bad economy and with our history, there's lots of communities or people that are left out anyway. And a bad economy, worsening environmental challenges facing us, it could get even worse. So I guess, and this is what motivates me to get into the race and run. It's not just, what's the right solution on the viaduct, or can we get light rail over 520? These are all just things, or how do we get housing and affordable transit for people? These are all just things that are means to an end. We have in front of us a set of choices to make about how we build the city, about housing, transportation, investing in education, public safety, that will make a huge difference as to whether Seattle continues to thrive into the future.